Hi there, my name is Ewan Nicholson. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Remembering Love. The title of today's video is how do you dramatically reduce the volume of your inner critic? Now this is going to be a 4-part series. I actually did try to do the whole thing in one big long video. It triggered my inner critic, so now I've broken it down into 4 videos. This first video, part 1, we're going to be looking at the basic question of what is an inner critic, why and how do we end up having an inner critic, and why it's an important thing to address and kind of look at. In the second video, we're going to be looking at how do we make that distinction between what is the voice of our inner critic and what is the voice of our conscience. Like how do we distinguish the two and why that can be a little bit tricky and what you can do about it. In the third video, we're going to be looking at why positive affirmations, in inverted commas, are not enough when it comes to really attending to, understanding, and discharging the energy of an inner critic. And in the fourth video, we're going to be looking at 5 practical steps you can take immediately to reduce the volume of the inner critic. So we're going to bring it all together, and I'm going to give you some very straightforward things that you can do to bring the volume of that inner critic down that have worked for me on a very practical level. So stay tuned for that last video. So let's get started on today. So what is the voice of an inner critic? So I'm going to begin with a very simple definition. The critical inner voice is a well-integrated pattern of destructive thoughts towards ourselves and others. The nagging voices or thoughts that make up this internalized dialogue are at the root of much of our self-destructive and maladaptive behavior. So I think this is quite a good definition of the inner critic. And what it's really talking about is this voice where it's narrating and giving negative commentary on things you do, things you say, things you think, things you feel. It can be often directed towards ourselves, but it can also be projected outwards as well. And to get an idea of what this is really about, just imagine there's a person that spends their whole day with you. They shadow you, they're with you every minute of the day. And not only are they with you, but they can also hear what you think and understand what you're feeling. And depending on what you're doing throughout the day, all they have to say is something negative. You shouldn't have done that. You need to be more assertive. You need to shut up. You need to listen more. You should have really said this. You shouldn't have really said that. You're terrible. You're fat. You're lazy. Whatever it may be. But that's all they do. All day they just follow you around and put you down and put a negative spin, whatever it is that you're doing, saying, thinking or feeling. Now, if in physical reality there really was an individual that followed us around saying all those things, we would not tolerate it. We would just tell that person to get lost. We would just be done with them. In the same way that, sometimes we have friends and maybe we feel that friend's too negative, even a little bit, we push that person away. And it's a strange thing how we tolerate a certain harshness towards ourselves that we're allowed to say, that we're allowed to feel, but we wouldn't allow it externally coming in. It would feel too harsh or too much. In the same way, when it comes to, say, our children, which often we see as an extension of ourselves, we feel like we're allowed to say negative things about our kids. If I had a friend and I said, oh my God, my kids are so insufferable and they're just precocious brats and I can't stand being around them. And my friend in response said, yeah, I agree, your kids are the worst. I would have a problem with that. I'd be mortally offended. I'd be like, what? What did you say? How dare you say that about my children? I mean, I'm allowed to criticize them, but you aren't. In the same way, if I said, look, I really feel like I'm such a fat, lazy, Jabba the Hutt slob, and a friend said, you know what, you are. You really need to lose a bit of weight, fatty. I would, again, be mortified and offended. So it's a strange kind of thing that the harshness we direct towards ourselves, we wouldn't permit and allow from other people. And look, everyone's inner critic is going to be a little bit different. Not everyone's inner critic is just going to be this sort of one way. Maybe your inner critic is angry. Maybe it's more of a Gordon Ramsay style inner critic. Maybe your inner critic is more just negative and grumpy, like Oscar the Grouch or Bert from Sesame Street. Maybe your inner critic is condescending and patronizing, like Judge Judy. Maybe your inner critic is angry and grumpy, like the grumpy cat. So, every inner critic is going to have a different feel and different flavor depending on how it's been brought about, depending on your personality type. But the end result is the same, which is a background narrative that's critiquing, being negative about the way you act, the way you think, and the way you feel. that is oppressive. I mean, it's really difficult to live with, but we do live with it. We do tolerate it. And what we're going to be looking in this video series is, what we can actually do about it. So the next question we're going to address now is, why does this inner critic exist? How does an inner critic come about? Because we're not born with it, so how does one come about? So let's look at this very basic definition. These inner voices usually come from early life experiences that are internalized and taken in as ways we think about ourselves. Often, many of these negative voices come from our parents or primary caregivers. As children, we pick up on these negative attitudes that our parents not only have towards their children, but also towards themselves. Our voices also can come from interactions with peers and siblings or influential adults. So what they're really talking about here is the understanding that our self-perception gets formed during our childhood. And the external messaging systems that we're brought up in, particularly in our family of origin, have a great bearing on how we think about ourselves. Because our early years are all about developing a sense of identity, of who am I? What am I? And our family environments really give us an understanding of that. And if you grow up in a family environment where a parent or someone that's near and dear to you that you spend many, many years with is saying to you over and over and over, you're quite stupid, you're quite dumb, you're quite silly, you're quite this, you're quite that, and it's negative. And you're not just hearing it 1 week or a month, but you're hearing it over and over and over years and years and years, while your brain is forming, while your identity is being developed. Little by little, that external message of you're stupid or you're silly is going to get internalized, not as they think I'm silly, but I am silly, I am stupid. And then what happens is, long after those voices disappear, that we move out of home or we grow up as we become adults, that internal voice is still there. It's still chipping away. It's still enforcing itself. It's still feeling like a valid thought and understanding. And this is where the problem lies, that these voices, this inner critic, is not a natural phenomena of just growing up. And the problem is, like a lot of these adaptions or things we take on during our childhood, we get into our adult lives and they become debilitating, or they just become outdated. They do have a function. That the voice of the inner critic protects us. It makes sure it ensures we don't get in trouble or do something wrong or maybe bring attention to ourselves. But obviously there's a certain point where its function is redundant, that we don't need to survive or out of that environment, and we can afford to let it go. And there are variations of this. It's not just all as straightforward as, if you grow up with a parent that says you're stupid and then you eventually think I'm stupid. So for instance, there's a cultural version of this. When you look at the epidemic of teenagers feeling bad about their body image, that is completely artificial. So we have a contemporary advertising and media industry constantly throwing at young girls images of beauty which are skinny, models, whatever it may be. And the message is, if you're not this, then you are ugly. If you're not this, you are fat. And eventually, if you're bombarded and immersed and saturated in that images, those external messages for long enough, and most modern kids are, from whatever age all the way through to they get to 12, you are going to start internalizing that if I'm not this, I'm ugly. If I'm not skinny, I'm fat. If I don't look to this computer-generated image and I'm just seeing all the time around me, there's something wrong with me. Now, obviously, from the advertiser's perspective, that's a good thing. They get insecure people feeling like the only way they can feel beautiful is buy this product or do this. So it creates consumerism, it creates purchases, etc., etc. But the end result for young teenage girls is they have an artificially created sense of negative identity. So that's a cultural messaging system which gets internalized. But it can also work in a family system where if you have a narcissistic parent that is constantly big noting themselves, constantly going on about how great they are and how amazing they are, indirectly they're saying you're not that. Because if you're not me, then you must be bad. You must be less than. It can also come from neglect. If you grow up in a family where you're given no attention, no time, no care, no concern, you're made to feel invisible, then the messaging that you get from that is I'm of no value, then I'm of no worth. And that becomes an internalized message. So there are more direct versions, there are more indirect versions, but the end result is that those messages we receive about ourselves become internalized messages that we just carry on in our life thinking, well, that's just how I think about myself, or that's just the way it is. Yeah, in the same way that if we got a computer and that computer got a virus on it, and all of a sudden that virus started freezing the computer up, creating all sorts of problems. But if we thought, well, that's just the way the computer's built, that's just how it is, without realizing, no, that's been externally put on. That's not part of the operating system. That's an external virus that is messing with the computer completely unnecessarily. Now, once we realize it is unnecessary, then we can do something about it, which is what this video series is about. But it's understanding that this internal voice isn't something we just have to bear with or accept or give authority to or legitimacy to. That we can do something about it. And the reason we need to do something about it is it's just not nice to live with it. I mean, I've had, and I do still have, an inner critical voice. And the title of this video is to turn the volume down. So we're not talking about deleting it or eliminating it. It doesn't quite work that way. But there are ways to really bring its volume down to the point you feel like it's not interfering and getting in the way all the time of your life. Because like we talked about at the beginning of the video, you wouldn't put up with it if someone just followed you around all day, constantly berating you, constantly putting you down. Yet we do when it comes to this voice. So it's really important to understand that we can do something about this. It isn't something we just have to accept, grin and bear with. And that's what we're going to be looking at over the next few videos. So look, I hope this has resonated. Hope this has made sense. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Please take care of yourself, and bye-bye.